Start investing in gold and silver at sdbullion.com today and join over 35,000 precious metals investors who have made the switch to the lowest gold and silver prices in the industry. SD Bullion recently claimed a spot on the prestigious Inc. 500, making them one of the fastest growing bullion companies in the United States. With low bullion prices and over-the-top customer service, SD Bullion is setting the standard for precious metals transactions. Visit www.sdbullion.com today. Start saving on every precious metals purchase you make.
So I guess when you're talking about the removal of Christianity and really any sort of moral guideposts that we have, I think that from the perspective of the globalists, that's absolutely necessary. All of these categories need to be removed. People need to be re-educated. We are in the midst of a gigantic re-education campaign, and they have the most sophisticated tools that the world has ever seen.
Hey friends, thank you so much for tuning in and welcome back to SGT Report. Thanks for visiting us for real news at sgtreport.com.
And I want to offer a very special thank you to our Patreons over at Patreon SGT Report, and an additional special thanks to everyone who has visited survivalmode.us, our new health store. Many of you have reached out with very kind comments, and in turn, I thank you so much for visiting.
Guys, I have on the line a Ohio-based contributor to Squawker. His name's Michael Hart, and he reached out to me to discuss his article, Destruction Coming to America, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, and the Fourth Turning. Guys, you may recall the book, The Fourth Turning, released in 1997 by William Strauss and Neil Howe. The complete title of the book is The Fourth Turning, What Cycles of History Tells Us About America's Next Rendezvous with Destiny. A very well-reviewed, very popular book, often cited book, even among our circles. So before we begin here, let me just welcome Michael. Michael Hart, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thanks for reaching out to me. I think just to set the stage, Michael, if you don't mind, I'm going to read the first two paragraphs of your article, and then we'll just dive in. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, and guys, it goes like this. A crisis is not coming. It is already here, and it will be as defining a moment in the history of the U.S. as the Great Depression, World War II, or the American Civil War. That is, if you believe an interesting theory laid out in a book called The Fourth Turning, What Cycles of History Tells Us About America's Next Rendezvous with Destiny. In this book, published in 1997, authors William Strauss and Neil Howe make the argument that our ideas about the nature of history, linear time, and progress are illusory, and that if we want a more accurate concept on the way that history unfolds, we would do well to study the ancient Greek concept of cyclical time. This concept views national and global historical phenomenon not as randomly occurring events or the linear march of historical progress, but instead sees them as recurring archetypes placed into a larger tapestry of a greater repeating historical cycle. The Fourth Turning, Destruction is Coming. According to Strauss and Howe, the relative geographic and historical isolation of the United States provides a unique opportunity to view this historical cycle unfold regularly and predictably every 80 years. And this 80-year cycle can be divided into 4 stages or seasons, each lasting approximately 20 years. Michael, let's talk about this. One of the things that comes to mind that I sort of disagree with right off the bat is that it seems to take away a little bit of our free will as humans. Do you truly believe that humans are being steered through this historical cycle of time, which is really unbreakable?
Well, I don't necessarily know if it takes away our agency, but I see this idea as just kind of recognizing a particular organizing principle that seems to affect a lot of human history. You look at the way that a year progresses in the 4 seasons of the year, and that's something that we can count on happening over and over again with great regularity. I don't necessarily see this as being a sort of religious prophecy, but more just a recognition of natural cycles that have occurred throughout U.S. history. And as the authors of this book note, it's something that has happened all throughout at least contemporary modern history. They trace a lot of similar historic patterns throughout European history,
but it's a claim of the authors that we can experience a really untainted unfolding of this particular cycle in the U.S. A lot of European history was affected by sort of neighboring superpower states, which can affect the length of these particular cycles. But they claim that in the U.S., because we don't have that particular issue of neighboring powerful states, that we can witness this cycle playing out with a greater regularity.
Well, one thing is for certain. We know this, and I think it was Churchill that said, those that don't remember history are condemned to repeat it. It does feel as though, in my position on this, it maybe makes for an interesting conversation. You tell me if you think I'm just a tinfoil hat-wearing nut. My position is that there are powers, City of London powers, Vatican powers, call them New World Order, Illuminati powers, families that have been in power for generations, maybe a millennia, that steer human history. I think it's quite possible there's a whole hidden human history that we don't even know about. Maybe there's been rises and falls of civilizations like the one we're currently living in that aren't told in the history books. So I think that the 80-year cycle you describe is potentially very real, but I wonder how much of it is being steered by powers behind the scenes.
Well, that's a really good question. And, if you look at things like the Great Depression, there were certainly a lot of things behind the scenes that happened that precipitated this. And the period of the Great Depression up until World War II is kind of what the authors identify as our nation's last crisis period. But I think that there's definitely a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think that a lot of these global superpowers can sort of harness the zeitgeist and steer things in a particular direction. I think that probably we're witnessing quite a bit of that right now. Although this book was written in 1997, since then, the authors and a lot of the folks that are sort of fond of this particular idea of cycles have cited the 2008 financial crisis as possibly being kind of the precipitating moment of this crisis that we're witnessing unfold. And I think that both you and I, as well as a lot of your listenership, can both recognize the fact that the events of 2008 and the financial crisis certainly did not happen in a vacuum. And a lot of it was a controlled demolition of our economy. So I think that you're right. There's a lot happening behind the scenes. And I think that the idea of other global power players kind of harnessing, as I said before, harnessing the zeitgeist and leading us into this crisis period is absolutely a possibility.
Well, agreed on that, and it's interesting that you brought up the 2008 crisis. I've been playing this soundbite that I'll play for you here in a second quite often here recently in interviews because I think it's so important, because I do agree that destruction is coming. Certainly economic destruction could come at the flip of a switch by the banking powers, and I think that this example that I'm about to play, this is Representative Kanjorski explaining on C-SPAN just after the 2008 crisis, how close to the precipice of complete economic collapse the world was, not just the United States, but the complete and total collapse of the dollar, the U.S. economy, and by virtue of that, the entire global economy. Listen to this.
Their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours, the world economy.
Michael, that's powerful testimony about just how close we were to the precipice. And to me, it really supports what I was saying. I think there are powers behind the scenes. That to me sounds like a coordinated attack from the banking elite. That's not moms and pops. That's not the common man panicking and trying to get their money out of the bank. That's a coordinated attack to bring the U.S. economy to its knees. And they ended up getting what they wanted, didn't they? They got a blank check from the Congress.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they basically held our country hostage, and they demanded their bailouts, and they certainly got what they wanted, and certainly no accident. Absolutely not an accident. The interesting thing, so basically the authors talk about this being a 4-stage cycle. You can kind of divide that into 20-year periods within this larger 80-year cycle, and the 20-year period immediately preceding a crisis
which the authors refer to as an unraveling. That's basically the point where all of the social institutions have become absolutely rotten and corrupt. Human beings have absolutely no faith in these institutions. The experience of the individual is elevated to the highest point. So it is not only a complete atomization of society, there's no social cohesion, but also the individual's faith in what were formerly trusted institutions is completely eroded.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. It feels like we're there. Now, according to this article that you've written and you recap the book, The Fourth Turning, the initial stage immediately follows a period of crisis. That would have been World War II. Everybody comes together. There's prosperity. There's conformity, etc. The second stage is the awakening or the turning. It's a period of questioning established values. That's like the 60s, the psychedelic revolution, anti-war protests, new spiritual age movements, etc. The third stage is the unraveling. That's the emphasis on autonomy and the questioning of spiritual, political, and individual authority in the quote awakening stages. It eventually destabilizes society, and that has certainly happened. They've done a hell of a job destroying the family unit. And the fourth stage is crisis. In the fourth turning, a destabilizing event, usually involving warfare, leads to the destruction and reconstruction of institutions of power. I would say the fourth turning happened on 9/11. We were hit, and hit hard, they tell us, by an enemy that hates us for our liberty and our freedom, and ever since we've been at endless wars around the world, and those wars only seem to be broadening. The reach of this government in these unconstitutional wars of aggression seems to only become more imperialistic, more American treasure and bloodshed for, I don't know, at this point, I'd say they're wars for Israel. Again, powers behind the scenes manipulating world events. But I think the authors thought the period would be from 2005 to around 2025, this crisis, this fourth stage. I think it started in 2001, Michael.
I think that there's a good possibility of that, and I've certainly considered that. This book having been written in 1997, that's a few short years away from those attacks. So yeah, the September 11th attacks absolutely changed the course of global geopolitical history, and they certainly took them in a direction where a lot of these. A lot of these plans could have been put into action. You look at the Project for a New American Century,
exactly,
and
right.
the Bush administration being, basically filled with neocons, with this particular overarching narrative that the world needed to be reshaped according to, their particular principles to end history as Francis Fukuyama had, famously stated in the late 80s. And so, yeah, I think that to a degree you're right. And certainly the global financial crisis of 2008, that can't be seen as a, happening in a vacuum. And certainly the events of the September 11th attacks played a huge role in it. The migrant crisis that we're, witnessing now, you can trace a lot of this back to those attacks on September 11th. So, yeah, so I think, I think that to a degree you're absolutely correct.
Okay, well now let's address the elephant in the room. The title of your article recapping this book is Destruction Coming to America, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, and the Fourth Turning. And you do make note in your article that much of the establishment press have made note of Steve Bannon's interest in the book, striking a fearful and disturbing tone, inferring that Bannon wishes to somehow bring about this fourth turning. I think that's a tremendous reach. There's been a lot of interest in the fourth turning, this book. It's not just Steve Bannon. And, my position on this has been, had Hillary Rotten Clinton been able to somehow get into the White House, either by selection or actually being lawfully elected, we'd be on the same path to destruction, and maybe on a quicker path to destruction. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the press, and I cite a couple of those articles in my piece for squawker.org, but they have sort of accused Steve Bannon of having this apocalyptic worldview, where he is actually looking to induce this crisis period for the United States. And it is my contention that that is not a correct analysis. People who subscribe to this idea of these 80-year cycles see them as being something that is beyond the reach of human intervention, that there's nothing that we can do to steer towards it or accelerate it or hit the brakes to prevent it from happening, that no matter what we try, these particular cycles of crisis and then prosperity and then social unraveling, they're absolutely inevitable. And so, if anything, and from what I've read about Steve Bannon's worldview, it seems as if he sees himself as being consciously aware of these cycles and wishes to kind of play a role in steering the United States through it, actively captaining the ship while not catalyzing the event, because catalyzing the event is impossible. It's like the seasons, as I mentioned before. You can't delay winter. There's no way that we can extend summer. We just have to make correct preparations for it. And so I think that is probably what Steve Bannon seems to be getting at.
Well, I like the word catalyzing, and it reminds me of that PNAC document in which they called for a catalyzing and cataclysmic event to redirect the American people toward a war mind, and they got that out of 9/11. Again, I think it's the manipulation of history that we have to watch for, and I think one of the really important examples of the manipulation of history that we're living through right now is this fake news meme. You may realize that in November of 2016 here recently, the Google CEO Sundar Pichai came out and famously said, there is no room for fake news at Google, which begs the question, who decides what is real news and what is fake news? Michael, it's those who write the history, and Google is really in the process right now of working with Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the CIA, CNN, of steering history and painting a picture of history that may not be the reality. That's why SGT Report exists. That's why we're having this conversation right now. I think the powers that be are trying to manipulate American public opinion on a daily basis, 24/7, through their Mockingbird media outlets like CNN.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. Through CNN, through Facebook, through so-called neutral fact-checking websites. This is absolutely a revision of history and a revision of culture. I think that it's indicative of the United States right now being under the control of an occupying entity. When you look at what's going on in Louisiana with the removal of Confederate statues. They are trying to remove our history. They're trying to control the narrative, which they can never control, because outlets like yourself and Squawker.org exist to hopefully counter this narrative and provide critical thinkers with more accurate information. This is absolutely a revisionist period of history. And we need to man the battle stations because this is a fight and this is a war, and it's an information war, as a lot of people like to describe it.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, that's, I think, Alex Jones InfoWars is sort of their slogan. It's an info war. There's a war on for your mind, and there really truly is. And we're fighting that battle. And let me ask you this. When you say the U.S. is under the influence of an occupying entity, I like that. I agree with it. The question is, and I'd just like your opinion on this, I have my own answer. Do you think that occupying entity is just godless liberals? Do you think it's mindless neocons? Is it a Zionist entity? Is it the AIPAC lobby? What is this entity? Is it the central bank? Is it a combination of all these things? Who is this occupying entity?
Well, that's a really good question. And I would say that the occupying entity is comprised of all of the groups that you have just described. Recently I watched an interview with Canadian Professor Jordan Peterson, and the question was posed to him about, whether or not the people who show up to his talks to protest, because he's a very controversial figure. People come to protest and disrupt his speeches. And so he was asked if these people are all consciously aware of the agenda that they're promoting, the agenda of postmodernism and of cultural Marxism. And his answer was that through his research of neurobiology, if you look at the way that the brain functions, there's not one individual neuron that's going to have all of the information about how the brain functions or all of the information about a particular entity. It's an entire network of neurons that are active in the retrieval of, let's say, just a single memory. And I think that as far as your question goes about who exactly this occupying entity is, I think that there's a lot of groups involved and a lot of different components to it. that are not necessarily aware of this sort of overarching globalist, postmodern, cultural Marxist agenda, but that are certainly playing an active role. And when those groups are sort of united, or when those groups are acting in cohesion, the true nature of that occupying entity is revealed.
You know, I actually agree with you about that. I don't think it's so easy, and I see this a lot in the comments. I see people throw out one group. You know, it's this group, it's that group, it's the Vatican, it's the Jews. It's not that easy. And I'm going to cite an article that will help people understand. The article is this from theconversation.com. Who owns the world? Tracing half the corporate giants' shares to 30 owners. The article reads, when people say share ownership is highly diversified, they think most large public corporations have lots of shareholders, and often the largest shareholder has less than 15%, sometimes less than 5% of the total shareholdings. The article goes on to say, though, when one organization alone controls more than 6% of shares in very large global corporations, and 30 control more than half of all shares in these corporations, that signifies very high concentration, and it goes on to say that that is the case. I think that the oligarchy, the money powers, the central banking powers, these families that have been around for generations that hand money down, these dynasties that have been built that hold far more wealth, Michael, than Bill Gates in one generation could possibly accrue. Warren Buffett has one generational wealth. The people that control this planet that are guiding human history have multi-generational wealth and knowledge that have been handed down for millennia. I think that's the beast. That's the entity that is occupying America.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it is a multi-tentacled beast. It's like the mythical, it's like the structure of a hydra. The multi-headed hydra. There's not one central locus of power. When we're talking about this, it's like playing whack-a-mole, where if we can strike one part of it, it's just going to pop up in two different places. And so I think that similarly, the resistance to it has to take on a similar structure. A lot of the resistance to globalism and this postmodernist cultural Marxist occupying force has sort of erupted around Donald Trump. And while he is certainly an important figure in the movement, I think that everybody realizes that we cannot place all of our chips on Donald Trump. That if something happens to him, if he's taken out, if he disappoints us, the entire movement falls apart. We certainly can't have that. So resistance to this entity needs to be structured in the same way that the entity is, with that one central locus of power.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, we need to turn the power back to the people. The constitutional principles, the Bill of Rights, the principles provided for liberty in the Constitution is what needs to be re-embraced. I don't know that we're going to get any help from that from the libtards. And I'm sorry, guys, if you don't like that term, but at this point, that's what they are. I think Hillary Clinton is a godless witch, my opinion. And we're not going to get any help from these people as they seem hell-bent on stampeding over our rights to get their own agendas pushed through. And it's a real problem. And I guess I would just flush out the rest of the conversation with making this point. If Hillary and many on the left are truly godless, and now I'm seeing fingers being pointed at people like Pence and Bannon and Trump, and apparently there's all these evangelicals I keep hearing, lining the cabinet with evangelicals, or maybe mostly neocons, but let's say there's this evangelical entity, this evangelical characteristic that's been brought. That to me says godliness. That to me says people that at least have spiritual faith or believe in a higher power, good or bad. That's what they are. To me, Michael, at this point in human history, if we're being asked to choose between the godless left, like Hillary Clinton and her minions, or people that have spiritual faith and higher power, it would seem to me that that's the better choice. I want your thoughts on that, because as it relates to the Founding Fathers and the Constitution, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's very specific that it says our rights are given to us by our Creator. They're endowed. We are endowed with inalienable rights by our Creator, which means that no man, no Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, no George Soros, no Rothschild can take our rights away from us. They are inalienable. They are God-given. That's a very, very important document.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The whole concept of natural law and natural rights is certainly derived from the New Testament view on humanity. And it's derived from the idea
that every individual is afforded certain rights due to the existence of the little spark of divinity that exists within each of us. And I think that right now what we're witnessing is an attempt to trample and to de-emphasize the rights of the individual and to focus on the collective. And, certainly Western history is predicated on the principles of Christianity and has been refined throughout the last 2,000 plus years. And unfortunately, Hillary Clinton and George Soros and their ilk are looking to overturn that and replace it with something, Marxism, a couple hundred years old. Every single time it's been implemented, it's resulted in a complete disaster, has enriched the minority while impoverishing the mass of people affected by it. And if you look at what's going on in Venezuela right now, I think that's the best example for those that are not old enough to recognize the horrors of the Soviet Union. So that's our choice right now.
Well, I think you're spot on, and Venezuela is a very sobering example of where we could end up should we hit hyperinflation. And we won't get into precious metals and the need to maybe have some of those to shore up your reserves in case of a calamity and an economic collapse. But the people in Venezuela that have any precious metals at this point in physical form are surviving, because right now there's lots of people and children literally starving in Venezuela because of the nightmare they're going through. And I think that was also a banker-propagated nightmare. It's been caused on purpose. It doesn't have to be that way. They have plenty of resources there. Again, that's a nation being victimized by, we could say, Western banking powers. I would prefer to say City of London banking powers, Wall Street banking powers. But I just want to circle back and say that I do believe that spirituality and the concept of Christianity in general, the concept of believing in God and a higher power, is under attack by these globalist New World Order powers. Heavy attack. And again, when people don't believe in something, they're able to fall for anything. They're likely to fall for anything. And that's exactly what people like George Soros want. I just want to share this with you from Natural News. Science Propaganda. A new study claims that people who believe in religion are, quote, brain damaged. I'm not making that up. It just seems to me that the attack on spirituality is on, which leads me to believe that this whole prediction, this biblical prediction really, of a satanic end time scenario is actually where they want to steer us. Because what is the absence of God? An absence of God on this planet and in our society, I think, leaves a vacuum to be filled by a satanic ideal or a vision, or a satanic vision for humanity. I don't know if you want to go there. That's just my opinion. And I think maybe we should talk about it, since this fourth turning does apparently spell destruction.
I think that kind of relates to a concept that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, where if you look at what's going on culturally, it does seem like there is an agenda to sort of, impose chaos when it comes to people's moral values and categories of gender and just all of these things where, our history is being erased. The idea of male versus female is being completely blurred. A lot of the popular scientific thinking has been hijacked by ideologues like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, I love that you mentioned Bill Nye. Oh my God, have you seen that ridiculous? Have you seen that?
Sex junk.
Power bottom or a top off. Versatile love may have some butt stuff.
Oh my God! Honestly, man, that is the single best example of what we're up against. I mean, that looked like a Saturday Night Live skit, but it was not. And for him to get in there at the end of that and say,
"Exactly the right message, Rachel. Nice job. Wow, Rachel Bloom, everybody."
That was exactly the right message. I mean, it's truly, truly insanity. That is how far down the rabbit hole we're going. I think you and I are on the same page here.
Absolutely, yeah. And, so I guess when you're talking about the removal of Christianity and really any sort of moral guideposts that we have, I think that from the perspective of the globalists, that's absolutely necessary. All of these categories need to be removed. People need to be re-educated. We are in the midst of a gigantic re-education campaign, and they have the most sophisticated tools that the world has ever seen. And that's why we need to stand up, and we need to strike back metaphorically with whatever tools are at our disposal.
I want to ask you this here because, we've talked about Hillary. I do believe she's just a completely godless person who has done much, much harm to this nation and would have done much more harm had she become president. Do you find it as fascinating as I do that just in recent days here there was information that suggested that Seth Rich was the DNC leaker who provided over 44,000 emails to WikiLeaks, and that's been completely covered up and ignored by the mainstream media, who have, instead of focusing on that, have chosen to continue with this fake Russian news meme, and now they're talking about trying to impeach Trump because he fired James Comey. When the fact of the matter is, for anybody paying attention, Comey was fired and should have been fired because I think he was obstructing justice in the case of Hillary Clinton and her need to be brought to justice. He was completely covering that up. So he fires Comey, which should have been done a long time ago, and this corrupt mainstream media in this nation spins the narrative. They flip the script, and they try to say he fired Comey because he's obstructing justice in this Russian investigation. Are you as flabbergasted by that as I am?
You know, it's really strange. And Comey is somebody that I think is very he's a character that's very difficult to pin down. And I'm not really sure what's going on with him. You know, there was an interview that I saw on Fox News a couple days ago with Trey Gowdy, where he was actually basically, to paraphrase what he said, that if the public ever becomes aware of the circumstances surrounding Comey's recommendation to not pursue charges against Hillary Clinton, that history will indeed vindicate him. And I thought it was interesting. He later seemed to infer that the Clintons were so entrenched in the Department of Justice that if he were to recommend charges and they were to indeed prosecute Hillary Clinton, that something would have happened. They would have deliberately botched the prosecution. The evidence turned over to them would have been lost. And instead, he was hedging his bet on the idea that perhaps at a later time the case could be reopened. So Gowdy, at least in regard to the Clinton prosecution in 2016, seems to think that Comey was actually a good actor with that particular issue. But it's been really interesting the last few days with this Seth Rich issue. I've been following it fairly closely through a lot of online message boards, and people are doing a lot of intense research on it. And I mean, WikiLeaks, they pretty much go as far as they can in leading people to believe that Rich was indeed their source for the Podesta emails.
Well, that's right. That's 100% right. And, Stefan Molyneux and I agree on this. He did a really terrific recap of this. I think it was called The Truth About Seth Rich. And it's a fantastic documentation of all the facts that really clearly pretty much proved that Seth Rich was indeed the WikiLeaks leaker. And Assange has pretty much said as much, even offering a reward for the capture of any of the individuals involved in Seth Rich's murder. I would like to see the arrest of those who ordered the assassination of Seth Rich, because that's exactly what it was, in my opinion. It was a political assassination, and I think that if truth were ever known, if truth could be told, I would not be surprised if the roadmap led us back to the highest levels of the DNC, right to the desk of John Podesta, potentially Hillary Clinton herself. That's my opinion. But again, the mainstream corrupt mockingbird media in the United States is not going to talk about the assassination of Seth Rich. They're not going to talk about Seth Rich's potential ties and probable ties to WikiLeaks being the WikiLeaks leaker, which would, of course, give cause and motive for his murder, right? Podesta, there's an email, a famous Podesta email, where it talks about we need to make an example of this leaker. And boy, they sure did. He ended up dead not too long thereafter. All right, let's round out this conversation with the Steve Bannon part. I know that you don't think Steve Bannon is trying to foster or bring about these end times or this calamity that's coming. But is there any way that it can be prevented? Do conversations like this help? Can we wake up people so that they understand that they're being manipulated? Can it happen quickly enough that we can put the brakes on whatever's coming?
Well, I don't think it's something that we can put the brakes on, and I think that we are already, we're already kind of in the thick of it. I'm not sure what other events are going to unfold, or if there is indeed any sort of foreseeable endpoint to this part of the cycle. We really don't know. Sometimes,
the authors note that that these cycles can unfold, and that the period following the crisis, it might not actually work out for the best. It might not be fantastic, or it might not be great. There's no way that we can avert these particular crisis times, but I think that these conversations are helpful. People do need to prepare, and people do need to steel themselves for it. And people do need to kind of pay a little bit more attention to what's going on in terms of geopolitical events, because that provides some context. And if you can contextualize, the seemingly chaotic global geopolitical scene in sort of a framework that recognizes these particular cycles arising and then their eventual resolution, I think that that's helpful, and that can allow us to adequately prepare to weather the storm.
All right, last question for you, and it's about weathering the storm. I wonder how bad the storm will get, so we're going to talk about that. I want you to tell me if you think it's World War III, or is it just a total global economic collapse. Let's talk about what it is, but first I want to just mention the timeline again. In the book, they thought the timeline for this fourth turning, this last stage, would be 2005 to 2025. My thesis is that perhaps it started with 9/11 in 2001, which would make the end of this sequence in 2021. And that may not be so far off, because I've often cited the 1988 cover of The Economist magazine, the Rothschild-controlled Economist magazine, in which we see a phoenix rising from a burning pile of fiat dollars, and around the phoenix's neck is a gold medallion. It says 2018. That was a 30-year prediction for the rise of some sort of global currency and the demise of most fiat currencies. If that all started to happen in 2018, 2019, boy, the end of this cycle really could be 2021. But regardless of the time frame, what does this collapse look like? What does this catastrophic cycle, this fourth turning, what does it look like in your mind? How bad will it get?
It's difficult to say, but it could be any one of these things. It could be all of these things. It could be a sort of confluence of different disasters that are all happening at the same time. I honestly have no idea. I think that a global economic collapse is absolutely possible. I think that World War III is absolutely possible. All of these scenarios may be equally likely. As far as pinning it down to a specific event, I don't necessarily know if we can do that. It could be a confluence of different crises. And I think that that's what we need to prepare ourselves. Worst case scenario.
Yeah, I agree with you. And for those of us with faith in a higher power, in a creator, I think that a lot of people are calling this the end of days. I know that many generations throughout human history have felt like they were living in the end days. But boy, I'll tell you, Michael, it really seems to be pointing that way now, with the reestablishment of Israel back in the 50s, the Rothschilds playing their hand in that through the Balfour Declaration. It just seems like all the puzzle pieces are lining up. And for those on the left who are godless, my heart kind of goes out to them, because when you go through the end of days, when you go through anything as tumultuous as the times we're about to go through, and you don't believe in a higher power, that has to be a very, very lonely, isolating place to be. As they often say, there are no atheists in foxholes. I wonder how many will come around when the time comes. Last word from you, Michael. I really appreciate your time. Can you tell us how to find you on the net?
You can actually contact me through squawker.org if you have any questions. Just go to squawker.org, and my contact information is listed in my biography online.
Well, thanks for joining us. Guys, our guest has been Michael Hart. He's a contributor to Squawker. And Michael, thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And guys, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for checking us out at sgtreport.com. Also, check out our new online health store, survivalmode.us. And check me out on Steemit. All of the SGT Report YouTube videos are now appearing on Steemit as well. Truth will prevail. Thanks so much, guys, and have a wonderful week. God bless.